My name is Eleanor Vance, I'm 67 years old, and 3 days ago my own daughter threw me out of my home, telling me to find somewhere else to die. Before I tell you how I ended up with her entire $33 million inheritance, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The air in Arthur Davies's office was thick with a silence that felt heavier than grief. It was the kind of quiet that buzzes in your ears, pregnant with unspoken words. I sat in a plush leather chair that seemed to swallow me whole, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap that my knuckles were white. Across the vast mahogany desk, my daughter, Jessica, wasn't looking at me. She was looking at her platinum watch, tapping a perfectly manicured nail against its face as if this whole meeting was a tedious inconvenience, an annoying delay in her busy schedule. Arthur, our family lawyer for 30 years and a man who'd held my hand at my husband's funeral just 6 weeks prior, slid his glasses down his nose. He looked at my daughter over the rims, his gaze sharp enough to cut glass. "Miss Hayes," he began, his voice calm but laced with steel, "we have a serious problem." Jessica finally looked up, offering a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was the same polished, dismissive smile she gave to service staff. "I can't imagine what, Arthur." The will was perfectly clear. My father left his entire estate to me. It's tragic, of course, but his instructions were very specific. Arthur didn't flinch. He leaned forward slightly, his hands flat on the desk. "The document you provided to your mother, the one you claimed was your father's final will and testament, it's a very convincing forgery." The words hung in the air, electric and dangerous. Jessica's smile didn't falter, but her eyes went cold as ice. The tapping stopped. "That's a ridiculous and offensive accusation. My mother is grieving. She's confused." "Your mother," Arthur said, his voice rising just a fraction, "is the primary beneficiary of your father's actual last will, which he updated 6 months before his death. A will that I have right here." He slid a thick sheaf of paper across the polished wood. It stopped just inches from her hand. My late husband Richard's signature was bold and clear at the bottom, witnessed and notarized. A pit formed in my stomach as Arthur began to read. "I, Richard Vance, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath the following. To my beloved wife, Eleanor Vance, I leave our primary residence at 12 Maple Lane, Wellesley, Massachusetts, including all furnishings and personal effects. Furthermore, I leave her 70% of all my financial assets, investments, and accounts, totaling an approximate value of $23 million. My head started spinning. I gripped the arms of the chair to steady myself. 23 million. The house. My home. Arthur continued, his eyes fixed on Jessica. To my daughter, Jessica Hayes, I leave the sum of $10 million. I saw a flicker of triumph in Jessica's eyes, a disgusting flash of relief. But Arthur wasn't finished. This sum is to be held in trust, with distributions beginning on her 45th birthday, and is entirely contingent upon her treating her mother, Eleanor Vance, with the respect, dignity, and care she so richly deserves following my passing. Should she fail in this duty in any significant way, the entire $10 million will be forfeited and revert immediately to my wife, Eleanor." Silence. Complete, suffocating silence. Jessica's face was a mask of stone, but I could see a muscle twitching violently in her jaw. Arthur folded his hands. "So you see, Miss Hayes, you didn't just lie to your mother. You committed fraud. You committed felony elder abuse. And by throwing her out of her home and leaving her in a motel with $200, you triggered the one clause your father put in place to protect her from you." He leaned back, the leather of his chair groaning under the weight of his final words. "You didn't just cost yourself $10 million. You handed it directly to the woman you called useless." As I sat there watching my daughter's perfect world crumble into dust, my mind didn't focus on the money or the victory. It went back to that awful Tuesday. It didn't start with lawyers and forged documents. It started with a much smaller, sharper betrayal. It started with the sound of a moving truck in my driveway, and with the wedding ring my Richard had placed on my finger 43 years ago. My late husband, Richard, used to say that grief has a way of peeling back the layers of a person, showing you who they truly are underneath. I never understood what he meant until he was gone. In the 6 weeks after his funeral, I learned more about my daughter Jessica than I had in the 40 years I'd raised her. It started subtly. The sympathy cards were still on the mantelpiece when she began her campaign. She would arrive at the house in Wellesley, our home, bringing groceries I didn't ask for and company I didn't want. She'd walk through the rooms, her eyes not filled with memories, but with a cold, appraising look I'd only ever seen from real estate agents. "This house is just so much for you to manage alone, Mom," she'd say, her voice dripping with that fake, sticky sweet concern. "The stairs, the maintenance, all those memories, it's not healthy." At first, I brushed it off as misguided love. "She's worried," I told myself. "She's just trying to help." But then came the incident with the watches. Richard had a small, modest collection of vintage watches. Nothing extravagant, but each one had a story. His father's Omega from the war, the Rolex I'd saved up for 2 years to buy him for our 25th anniversary, the simple Timex he was wearing the day he died. I kept them in a beautiful cherrywood box in his study. One afternoon I walked into the study, a room that still smelled faintly of his pipe tobacco and old books, and found Jessica there. She had the watch box open on the desk. She wasn't admiring them. She was arranging them on a black velvet cloth and taking pictures with her phone, the flash glinting off the crystal faces. "What are you doing, honey?" I asked, a knot tightening in my stomach. She jumped, startled, and quickly shoved the phone in her pocket. "Oh, Mom, I was just helping you get organized. Making an inventory for the insurance, you know. These things are just collecting dust." Dust. His life's little treasures reduced to dust. I didn't say anything. I just closed the box and put it back on the shelf, my hands trembling slightly. That night I couldn't sleep. I crept downstairs and moved the watch box to the back of my own closet, burying it beneath old sweaters. It felt like I was hiding a piece of my husband from a thief. My own daughter. A week later the real assault began. I was in the garden trying to find some peace among my roses, when a van pulled up. Not a moving van, but one of those small, unmarked white vans. A man I'd never seen before got out and went to the front door. Jessica let him in. I hurried inside, my heart pounding. They were in the study again. This time they were pulling Richard's books from the shelves. Not just any books. His first editions. His signed copies. The leather-bound classics we'd collected together over 40 years of browsing dusty old bookshops. "Jessica, what is going on?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. She turned, that same plastic smile plastered on her face. Mark, her husband, was standing in the doorway avoiding my eyes. "Mom, calm down. This is Mr. Albright. He's an antiquarian bookseller. I thought we could clear out some of this clutter, make some space for you. You have to admit, Dad was a bit of a hoarder." Hoarder. The word was a slap in the face. He was a collector, a scholar. A man who loved the weight of a good book in his hands. This wasn't just clutter. It was his soul. "Put them back," I said, my voice dangerously low. "Mom, don't be sentimental," she sighed, rolling her eyes. "These are just things. They're worth a lot of money. A salary you could live on for a year. Money you're going to need." She patted my arm condescendingly. "Let me and Mark handle the practical things. You just focus on grieving." The bookseller looked uncomfortable, but Jessica shot him a look, and he continued packing the books into crates. I stood there, frozen in my own home, watching as she sold off my husband's memory piece by piece. She wasn't clearing space. She was erasing him. And I was just beginning to understand that she planned on erasing me right along with him. But I never could have imagined how quickly, or how cruelly, she would do it. The worst was yet to come, and it would arrive on a Tuesday, disguised as a promotion for my son-in-law. The final blow came last Tuesday. I remember the sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. The kind of beautiful autumn day Richard had loved. I was in the kitchen trying to find the energy to make myself some lunch, when Jessica's sleek black BMW pulled into the driveway. She and Mark got out, but this time they weren't empty-handed. They were pulling 2 large, expensive-looking suitcases from the trunk. For a fleeting, foolish moment, I thought perhaps they were going on a trip and wanted me to look after their things. They walked in without knocking. Jessica's face was beaming with an excitement that felt obscene in our house of mourning. "Mom, you are not going to believe the news," she announced, dropping her purse on the kitchen island. "Mark got the promotion." "Oh honey, that's wonderful," I managed to say. "It's more than wonderful, it's a game changer," Mark said, finally meeting my gaze. There was a nervous energy about him I didn't like. It means a big salary increase, but it also means I need to be in the city. Immediately. We've been looking for a place, and nothing compares to this. I stared at him, not quite comprehending. Compares to what? Jessica's smile widened, but it was sharp and predatory now. This house, Mom. It's perfect for us. The commute is a dream, it's got the space we need for entertaining, and it's in the best school district for the kids. We're moving in. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. I leaned against the counter for support. Move in? But, Jessica, this is my home. And that's when the mask, the one she'd been wearing for weeks, finally slipped. Her face hardened, the fake sympathy replaced by a cold, brutal calculation. Actually, Mom, she said, her voice flat. According to Dad's will, I inherited everything. The house, the investments, all of it. She must have seen the disbelief on my face because she walked over to her purse and pulled out a folded sheaf of papers, tossing it on the counter in front of me. Here. Read it yourself. I've been letting you stay here out of the kindness of my heart, but it's time for you to find your own place. Mark and I need to start our lives. I picked up the papers. It looked official. There was legal jargon I didn't understand, and at the bottom a signature that looked like Richard's. My mind was reeling. Richard would never. He wouldn't. There must be some mistake, I whispered, the words catching in my throat. No mistake, she snapped. Dad knew I'd take better care of his legacy than you ever could. You never understood money or investments. You were just the wife. Just the wife. 43 years of my life, of cooking and cleaning, of raising her, of nursing her father through sickness, of building this home brick by brick with love and sacrifice. All reduced to those 3 words. That's when she delivered the killing blow. I was crying now, silent tears streaming down my face. I begged her, pleaded with her to let me stay, even just in the guest room. She looked at me, not with pity, but with a chilling disgust, as if my grief were an ugly stain on her new life. Honestly, Mother, you're being pathetic, she said, her voice laced with venom. Dad is gone. Your job is done. You're useless now. Pack your things. Find somewhere else to die. Mark stood by the doorway looking pale, but he said nothing. He just watched as his wife shattered my world. They gave me 1 hour. 1 hour to pack up 43 years of a life. I moved through the house in a daze, stuffing clothes and photo albums into the 2 suitcases they'd so thoughtfully brought for me. When I was done, they walked me to the car like a prisoner being escorted off death row. As we drove away, I watched my home disappear in the rearview mirror. They didn't take me to a hotel. They took me to a grimy, run-down place on the edge of town called the Sunset Inn. Mark carried my bags inside. Jessica stayed in the car, already on her phone, probably calling a decorator. Mark handed me a small wad of cash. Here's $200, he mumbled, his eyes fixed on the stained carpet. It should cover you for a few days while you get settled. And then they were gone. I was left standing in a cold, dark room that smelled of stale cigarettes and despair, clutching $200. Just the wife. Useless. Find somewhere else to die. The words echoed in the terrifying silence of the room. I sank onto the sagging mattress, and for the first time I reached for my phone, my fingers fumbling as I dialed the number of my oldest friend, Carol. But the voice that answered was not the one I expected, and I quickly realized that Jessica's cruelty had depths I hadn't even begun to imagine. My fingers were trembling so badly I had to dial Carol's number 3 times. She was my rock, my neighbor for 40 years. We'd raised our children together, celebrated holidays, mourned losses. She was the one person in the world I knew I could count on. The phone rang twice, and then her familiar voice came on the line, but it was tight with a strange sort of caution. Eleanor? Is that you? Are you all right? Carol, oh Carol! I sobbed, relief washing over me in a wave so powerful it made me dizzy. Something terrible has happened. Jessica, she... Eleanor, wait! Carol interrupted, and the warmth I was so desperate for wasn't there. Her voice was strained. Jessica called me this morning. She told me everything. I paused, confused. She told you? She told you that she threw me out of my own house. There was a long, painful silence on the other end of the line. Then Carol sighed, a heavy, sad sound. Honey, listen to me. Jessica said, she said the grief has been really hard on you. That you've become confused. She said you've been having episodes, getting paranoid, and that you might start telling people these These wild stories. The blood drained from my face. I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the drafty motel room. It was the icy chill of betrayal. Carol, no. That's not true. She lied to you. I'm at a motel. The sun set in. She and Mark drove me here. Oh, Eleanor, Carol said, and her voice was filled with a pity that felt worse than any accusation. That's exactly what Jessica said you might say. She said you packed your bags yourself during an episode. She's so worried about you, dear. She's looking into getting you some professional help. A nice, quiet place where you can be looked after. A quiet place. A nursing home. A place to die. My daughter hadn't just thrown me out. She had systematically, and with surgical precision, destroyed my credibility. She had poisoned my oldest friendship, painting me as a crazy old woman lost in her grief. She had isolated me completely. No one would believe me. I was alone. Carol, please, I whispered, my voice breaking. You've known me for 40 years. Do I sound confused to you? You sound upset, Eleanor, she said gently. And you have every right to be. You've been through a terrible ordeal losing Richard. Just let Jessica take care of you. She loves you. I hung up the phone. I didn't slam it down in anger. I just gently placed the receiver back in its cradle. The finality of it was absolute. There was no one to call. No one to turn to. In the space of a few hours I had lost my husband, my home, my daughter, and now my best friend. You might think that this would be the moment I gave up. That I would just lie down on that sagging mattress and let the world fade away. And for a long while I considered it. I stared at the water-stained ceiling, listening to the traffic rumble by outside. A ghost in a life that was no longer mine. But then something else began to bubble up from the depths of my despair. It wasn't sadness. It was anger. A pure white-hot rage. Anger at Jessica. Anger at Mark for his spineless complicity. And anger at myself for being so blind for so long. And beneath the anger, a thought began to form. A stubborn, insistent thought. Richard. My Richard was meticulous. He was organized to a fault. He cross-referenced his financial records and kept receipts for everything. He was a man who planned for every contingency. And he would never, ever have left me destitute and at the mercy of our daughter's greed. He knew her. He loved her, yes, but he knew her. That will Jessica had shown me. It couldn't be real. It was a lie. And if it was a lie, then the truth was out there somewhere. The truth was with Arthur Davies. That single thought was a lifeline. It was the first solid thing I'd had to hold on to all day. I wasn't a confused old woman. I was a wife who knew her husband. I stood up from the bed. I walked over to the cracked mirror above the dresser and looked at my reflection. I saw a tired, grief-stricken woman with red-rimmed eyes. But for the first time in weeks, I also saw a flicker of something else in those eyes. A spark. The spark of a fight. Jessica thought she had taken everything from me. She was wrong. She had left me with one thing. Nothing left to lose. The next morning, I used 20 of my remaining dollars to take a taxi into downtown Boston. I didn't know it then, but that taxi ride was the first step on a journey that would change everything. A journey to reclaim not just my home, but myself. The brass plaque on the heavy oak door simply read, Davies and Associates, Attorneys at Law. Taking a deep breath that did little to calm the frantic beating of my heart, I pushed it open. The receptionist, a young woman with a kind face, looked up. Can I help you? I'm Eleanor Vance. I need to see Arthur Davies. It's about my husband's estate. Richard Vance. Her expression softened with recognition. Of course, Mrs. Vance. Mr. Davies has been trying to reach you. Please have a seat. I'll let him know you're here. He's been trying to reach me. The words sent a jolt of validation through me. A moment later, Arthur himself appeared in the doorway of his office. He was a tall, slightly stooped man in his 70s, with a shock of white hair and the same gentle eyes I remembered from the funeral. His face broke into a look of genuine relief when he saw me. Eleanor. My dear, I was so worried. I've been calling the house for a week, but Jessica kept telling me you were traveling. Taking some time away to cope. Traveling, I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. Yes, you could call it that. He ushered me into his office, a sanctuary of leather-bound books and quiet dignity. He closed the door and gestured for me to sit in one of the deep armchairs facing his desk. "Now," he said, sitting down opposite me, "tell me everything. And please don't leave anything out." And so I did. I told him everything. I told him about Jessica's talk of selling the house, about the watches and the books. I told him about the moving van, the fake will, and the 3 words that had been branded onto my soul: just the wife. I told him about the Sunset Inn, the $200, and the final cruel twist of her call to my friend Carol, painting me as mentally unstable. As I spoke, I watched the emotions shift across Arthur's face. His initial concern morphed into confusion, then into disbelief, and finally settled into a quiet, simmering fury. His kind eyes hardened. His hands, which had been resting on his desk blotter, clenched into fists. He didn't interrupt me once. He just let me pour out the whole ugly story, the humiliation and the pain. When I finished, the only sound in the room was my own ragged breathing. Arthur was silent for a long moment, staring at a point just over my shoulder as if processing the sheer monstrosity of it all. Then he spoke, his voice low and trembling with controlled rage. "Eleanor, what that girl has done is not just cruel. It is a monstrous crime. Several of them, in fact." He stood up and walked over to a massive filing cabinet, pulling out a thick folder with Vance, Richard typed on the tab. He brought it back to his desk and opened it. "Your daughter is a liar. An accomplished one, it seems, but a liar nonetheless. Richard would never have disinherited you. You were the center of his universe." He pulled out a document, the official one, bound with a blue ribbon. "This, Eleanor, is your husband's true and final will. He came to me 6 months ago to make some changes." He was concerned. "Concerned about what?" I whispered. Arthur looked me straight in the eye. He was concerned about Jessica's sense of entitlement. He said she and Mark had developed an obsession with money that worried him deeply. He said he was afraid. Afraid of what she might do when he was gone. Afraid she would try to take advantage of your gentle nature. Arthur's voice cracked with emotion. "He made me promise to look after you. It seems I've failed in that duty." "No, Arthur. You didn't fail. I did, for not seeing what she was becoming." He shook his head fiercely. "This is not your fault. This is hers. Now let's talk about what's rightfully yours." He cleared his throat and began to read from the will. He read the part about the house, the $23 million. And then he read the clause. The beautiful, terrible, brilliant clause about her inheritance being contingent on her treating me with dignity. When he was done, I just stared at him, unable to speak. "So you see," he said, his voice now cold and methodical, "all business. She played her hand and she lost everything. That $10 million she was so desperate to get her hands on? It's yours now, too." Tears started to well up in my eyes, but for the first time in weeks, they weren't tears of sorrow or despair. They were tears of overwhelming, gut-wrenching relief. "So, I'm not homeless." Arthur reached across the desk and placed his warm, dry hand over mine. His eyes were shining with a fierce, protective light. "Eleanor, you are the legal owner of your home, and an estate worth $33 million. He squeezed my hand. "And I promise you, on my friendship with your late husband, we are going to get it all back. The first thing we're going to do is call the bank and freeze every single asset. Let's see how Ms. Hayes enjoys her shopping spree when her credit cards are suddenly declined." He picked up the phone, a grim smile playing on his lips. "The show is over for your daughter. And the nightmare is over for you." Arthur's office transformed into a command center. For the next 2 hours, he was a man possessed, a whirlwind of focused, righteous fury. He made calls with a speed and authority that left me breathless. First, to the fraud department at Richard's bank. I heard him use phrases like flagrant elder abuse, criminal forgery, and immediate asset freeze. Within 30 minutes, every account tied to Richard's estate was locked down tighter than Fort Knox. Every credit card Jessica had linked to those accounts was now a useless piece of plastic. Next, he called a colleague, a bulldog of a criminal lawyer, and laid out the case. Then he called the local police department and spoke to a detective in the financial crimes unit, scheduling a meeting for later that afternoon. He moved with the efficiency of a general marshaling his troops for battle. For the first time since Richard died, I felt safe. I felt protected. I was sipping a cup of hot tea his secretary had brought me when my cell phone, resting on the corner of Arthur's desk, began to vibrate. The screen lit up with a picture of Jessica, smiling serenely on a beach somewhere exotic. The irony was nauseating. Arthur nodded at me. "Answer it. Put it on speaker. It's time." I took a shaky breath and pressed the green button. "Hello, Jessica." "Mom? Where are you?" Her voice was shrill, laced with a panic she was failing to conceal. "Something's wrong with the bank accounts. They're saying everything is frozen. My card was just declined at Neiman Marcus. Can you believe the humiliation?" I looked at Arthur. He gave me a subtle, encouraging nod. I found a strength I didn't know I possessed. "I can believe it, yes," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Hello, Jessica. I'm sitting in Arthur Davies's office. You remember him, don't you? Dad's attorney." There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, the frantic calculations. "Mom, I don't know what you think you're doing," she finally stammered, her tone shifting from panic to condescension. "You're obviously confused. Someone is taking advantage of you in your emotional state. You need to come home so we can sort this out." "Home?" I let out a short, bitter laugh. "You mean my home? The one you threw me out of 3 days ago? No, I don't think I'll be coming home just yet. And I'm not confused, sweetheart. In fact, I'm seeing things more clearly than I have in years." "What are you talking about?" she snapped. "I'm talking about the fact that I just spent a lovely morning with Arthur reading your father's real will. The one he wrote 6 months ago. The one you apparently didn't know existed." Another pause, longer this time. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Oh, it's very possible," I continued, feeling a surge of power. "You see, your father was a very smart man. He loved you, Jessica, but he wasn't blind. He knew you. He knew your greed. And he put in a little insurance policy to protect me." I explained the clause to her. The one about respect and dignity. The one that made her entire $10 million inheritance conditional. "So not only did you forge a legal document and commit multiple felonies," I said, my voice as cold as the motel room I had woken up in, "but you did it all for nothing. In your rush to grab everything, you triggered the one condition that ensures you get nothing. That $10 million? It's mine now too. All of it." I could hear her breathing quicken, turning into ragged, desperate gasps. No, he wouldn't. You're lying. You're a vindictive old woman." "Am I?" I said calmly. "Detective Miller from the Wellesley Police Department is on his way here right now. Perhaps you'd like to discuss the impossibility of fraud charges with him." That's when the real Jessica, the terrified narcissist underneath the designer clothes, finally emerged. "Mom, please," she begged, her voice cracking. "Please don't do this. We can work this out. I was just trying to protect you. You've never had to handle that kind of money. I was protecting you from yourself." The audacity of it even then was breathtaking. "Protecting me?" I said, the words dripping with ice. "You protected me by telling me to find a place to die? You protected me by trying to convince my best friend I was insane? You are a liar and a thief, Jessica. And your lies are finally over. You wouldn't dare press charges against your own daughter," she shrieked, her voice a raw scream of entitlement and disbelief. A cold, hard certainty settled in my chest. I thought of the motel, of Carol's pitying voice, of the look of disgust on my daughter's face. "Oh, Jessica," I said softly, letting the words land with the weight of a judge's gavel. "Watch me." I ended the call. I looked at Arthur, who was beaming, his eyes shining with pride. The silence that filled the room this time wasn't heavy or oppressive. It was the clean, quiet sound of justice. And in that quiet, I felt 43 years of being just the wife fall away, and a new woman, a stronger woman, began to take her place. The wheels of justice, it turns out, can move surprisingly fast when propelled by the fortune of a $33 million estate and the righteous fury of a lawyer like Arthur Davies. Jessica and Mark were arrested that evening. The police picked them up at a fancy restaurant where they were having dinner, presumably trying to figure out what had gone so horribly wrong. According to the detective, Jessica caused quite a scene, screaming about false arrest and demanding her lawyer. The next morning, Jessica made bail. I knew she would. What I didn't expect was for her to show up on my doorstep at 7 a.m. I had spent my first night back in my own bed, a night of deep, exhausted sleep, and was woken by the insistent ringing of the doorbell. Through the peephole I could see her. She looked terrible. Her hair was a mess, her expensive clothes were rumpled, and her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy. She looked like she'd aged 10 years overnight. I opened the door but blocked the entrance with my body. "Mom, please," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "We have to talk." "We talked yesterday," I said, my voice flat. "You told me to find a place to die. I found a place to live instead. Right here." Tears, real tears this time, streamed down her mascara-streaked cheeks. "I made a mistake, Mom. A terrible, horrible mistake. But I'm still your daughter." "Are you?" I asked, the question hanging in the cool morning air. Because daughters don't typically forge federal documents to steal their mother's entire inheritance. "I wasn't stealing," she insisted, a flash of the old defensiveness returning. "I was protecting you from making bad financial decisions." Even now, even after being arrested, she couldn't admit the simple, ugly truth. She was still the hero of her own twisted story. That's when I knew what I had to do. "Wait here," I said. I closed the door, leaving her on the porch, and went to my husband's study. On his desk, next to his computer, was a small, sealed envelope with my name on it. Inside was a USB drive and a note in Richard's familiar handwriting. "Eleanor, play this only if she proves you wrong about her, and me right. I love you." I walked back to the front door with my phone. I opened the door and found Jessica slumped on the top step, sobbing. "Your father was worried, you know," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "He told me 6 months ago that he was worried about your attitude toward money, your sense of entitlement." She looked up, her face pale. "Daddy never said that. He adored me." "He did adore you. But he wasn't a fool. He said he was changing the will specifically because he was afraid of what you would do to me if you had control." "That's a lie," she spat. "Actually, it's not," I said, holding up my phone. 6 months ago, your father recorded a video message. He left explicit instructions that it was only to be played in one of two scenarios: if you formally contested the will, or if you treated me poorly after his death. Congratulations, Jessica. You managed to hit both. I touched the screen. Richard's face filled the small frame, looking older, more tired than I remembered. But his voice was clear and steady, filling the morning air. "Jessica," he began, not looking at the camera but looking through it, as if he could see her standing on that porch. "If you are watching this, it means my greatest fears about your character have been justified. I have spent my life giving you everything. Your education, your first car, the down payment on your house. All I ever asked for in return was for you to be a good person, to be kind, especially to your mother." Jessica stared at the phone as if it were a venomous snake. "I have watched your mother for 43 years, Richard's voice continued, each word a carefully placed stone. "I watched her work part-time jobs to help pay for your college tuition while I was building my business. I watched her give up her own career opportunities, her own dreams, to pour everything she had into being the wife and mother she thought we needed. She is the reason for every success I have ever had. She is the bedrock of this family." He paused, and his eyes seemed to find mine through the screen. "By the time you see this, you will have discovered that your greed and your cruelty have cost you everything I set aside for you. Your inheritance wasn't just money, Jessica. It was a final test of your character. A test you have failed in the most spectacular way possible. You have proven me right, and in doing so you have broken my heart. I hope for your sake that it was worth it." The video ended. The only sound was the chirping of birds and Jessica's ugly, broken sobs. "He hated me," she choked out. "No, Jessica," I said softly, the last flicker of maternal pity stirring within me. "He loved you enough to hope you'd prove him wrong. You're the one who chose to prove him right." I put the phone back in my pocket. The porch felt like a courtroom, and the verdict had just been read. But as I stood there watching my daughter's utter devastation, I had no idea that a new player was about to enter the game. One who would make Jessica's crimes look like child's play. I thought the drama was over. I thought the worst had passed. I was naive. 2 days after my confrontation with Jessica, a gleaming black Mercedes purred to a stop at my curb. A woman emerged, tall and impossibly elegant, dressed in a Chanel suit that probably cost more than my first car. It was Elizabeth Hayes, Mark's mother. I had met her only a handful of times at holidays, and she had always treated me with a sort of polite, icy condescension, as if I were a mildly interesting piece of furniture. I invited her in, my curiosity overriding my apprehension. She settled into an armchair in my living room, not sitting so much as holding court, and got straight to the point. "Eleanor," she began, her voice as smooth and cold as marble, "we need to put an end to this unfortunate situation. My son Mark made some poor choices, obviously. He was led astray by your daughter's emotional instability. Prosecuting him seems rather vindictive, don't you think?" I stared at her, speechless at the sheer audacity. She was blaming my daughter to save her criminal son. Vindictive? "Mrs. Hayes, your son actively participated in a scheme to defraud me of my home and my entire inheritance." She waved a dismissive hand, the massive diamond on her finger catching the light. Details. What matters is finding a solution that benefits everyone. Kevin's lawyers believe we can reach a settlement. You drop the charges against my son, and in return, the Hayes family is prepared to compensate you for your inconvenience. Inconvenience? I repeated, my voice rising. "Let's say $5 million, she said, as if offering to pay for a spilled drink. "A generous offer, I think you'll agree. It will all be handled quietly. No messy trial, no publicity. Mark's reputation remains intact, and you are $5 million richer." The offer was staggering. $5 million to let the man who helped throw me out onto the street walk away scot-free. My answer was instant and absolute. No. For the first time, a crack appeared in her polished facade. A flicker of annoyance in her cold blue eyes. "Don't be a fool, Eleanor. You are a 67-year-old widow. What would you even do with $33 million? You'd be lost. We are offering you a clean, simple way out." My answer is still no. Your son is a criminal. He will face the consequences. Elizabeth Hayes stood up, her composure completely restored. She walked towards the door, then paused, turning back to face me. A slow, cruel smile spread across her face. "Very well. But you should know, Eleanor, that in the interest of protecting my son, our legal team has been doing some digging into your late husband's business practices. It's quite fascinating what one can find when one looks closely enough." A chill went down my spine. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about shell companies, offshore accounts, and some very questionable partnerships. It would be a terrible shame if Mr. Vance's pristine reputation were to be tarnished posthumously during a public trial. Sometimes the real criminal isn't the one in handcuffs. Think about my offer." And then she was gone, leaving her threat hanging in the air like poison. I immediately called Arthur. He was furious but also concerned. "Whatever they think they've found, Eleanor, it doesn't change the facts of what Jessica and Mark did. But they could try to muddy the waters, to paint Richard as a villain to a jury. It's a classic tactic. I wouldn't let them. I wouldn't let them slander the memory of my husband to save their own skin." "Arthur," I said, my voice firm, "I want to know what they found. I want to know everything. Hire the best forensic accountant you can find. I want to see every transaction, every partnership, every deal Richard ever made. I need to know the truth before they can twist it into a lie." That night, after the investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Carol Chun, had spent hours in Richard's study, photographing documents, I began my own search. I went through his files, his private ledgers, the ones he kept locked in his desk. And deep into the night, surrounded by stacks of paper that represented my husband's life's work, I found it. A separate set of books. A hidden list of transactions. Payments to companies I'd never heard of, for amounts that made my head spin. It was all there, in Richard's own meticulous handwriting. My husband, the honest, hard-working man I had loved and trusted for 43 years, had been living a secret life. And the Hayes family had just handed me the map to uncover it all. What I didn't know was that this dark secret was also Jessica and Mark's final desperate weapon against me. The forensic accountant, Ms. Chun, delivered her report 2 days later. She sat across from me at my dining room table, her expression grim, a thick binder of documents between us. "Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "I'm sorry to have to tell you this. Your husband wasn't just a successful consultant. For the last 15 years, He was engaged in a sophisticated scheme of tax evasion and hiding assets offshore. He used a network of shell corporations registered in the Cayman Islands to conceal a significant portion of his income from the IRS. The words hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just muddying the waters, as Arthur had said. It was real. The man I had shared a bed with for over 4 decades, the man I thought I knew better than I knew myself, was a crook. How much? I managed to ask. Based on these records, we estimate he shielded at least $10 to $12 million from the government over the years. That money. It's part of the inheritance, Eleanor. Legally, it's considered proceeds of criminal activity. If the IRS were to find out about this, they would not only demand back taxes and massive penalties, but they could seize a substantial portion of the estate. I felt sick. The foundation of my life, the security Richard had supposedly built for us, was all based on a lie. All those years I had scrimped and saved, clipping coupons and turning down the heat to save on the gas bill, while he was hiding millions of dollars overseas. How did the Hayes family find this? I asked, my voice a hoarse whisper. Mark is an investment broker. Elizabeth Hayes runs in circles where this kind of creative accounting is not uncommon. They would have recognized the patterns. They hired their own people to dig the moment Mark was arrested. They weren't just looking for dirt, Eleanor. They were looking for leverage. As if on cue, my phone rang. It was Jessica. I hesitated, then answered, putting it on speaker for Ms. Chun to hear. Mom, she said. Her voice was different now. The desperation was gone, replaced by a cold, chilling confidence. I assume you've had some time to think. Mark's mother tells me she paid you a visit. What do you want, Jessica? I'm going to tell you what's going to happen now, she said, as if dictating terms of surrender. Mark's lawyers have already prepared a file on Daddy's extracurricular activities. A very detailed file. They are prepared to hand it over to the IRS as part of a whistleblower complaint. My blood ran cold. If they do that, she continued, spelling out the trap with relish, Mark will likely get a reward and potential immunity for his cooperation. The IRS will descend on the estate like vultures. They will seize everything they can get their hands on. After the penalties and legal fees, you'll be lucky to be left with this house and maybe $1 million or $2 million. And you could even face charges yourself for unknowingly benefiting from his crimes. She paused to let the threat sink in. Or, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, there's another option. You go to the district attorney tomorrow morning. You tell them you were confused, that you overreacted due to grief. You drop all charges against me and Mark. In exchange, the file on Daddy disappears forever. His reputation remains intact. The full $33 million inheritance is released to you. No questions asked. We all walk away. We'll even give you back the $5 million Elizabeth offered, as a gesture of goodwill. It was the most diabolical, sociopathic thing I had ever heard. She was using her own father's crimes to blackmail me into letting her get away with her own. She was asking me to become her accomplice to protect the memory of a man who had lied to me for decades. This is not a negotiation, Mom, she said, her voice hardening. This is how it is. You have 24 hours to make a choice. Save yourself or save Daddy's good name. You can't have both. She hung up. I sat there in the silence of my beautiful home. A home built on a foundation of lies, surrounded by the evidence of my husband's secret life. Jessica was right. I had a choice to make. It was an impossible choice, a choice between my future and my past, between justice for myself and the honor of the man I had loved. And as the weight of it all crushed down on me, I realized Jessica and Mark had made one fatal miscalculation. They assumed I was still the same weak, pliable woman they had thrown out of this house a week ago. They had no idea who I had become in their absence. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. I didn't sleep. I just sat in Richard's study, my study now, and stared at the 2 piles of documents on his desk. On one side was the file Ms. Chun had prepared, the cold, hard proof of Richard's deceit. On the other was Arthur's file, detailing the airtight case against Jessica and Mark. My past versus my future. A liar versus a thief. Arthur was adamant. You can't give in to them, Eleanor. This is extortion, plain and simple. We fight them. We expose them. And what about Richard? I asked, my voice weary. We let them drag his name through the mud? We let the whole world know he was a tax cheat? What would that do to his memory? His memory is not worth your future, Arthur argued. He made his choices. Now you have to make yours. He was right. I spent the night thinking not just about the money but about the last 43 years. I thought about the woman I had been, the dutiful wife, the loving mother, the woman who always put everyone else's needs before her own, the woman who clipped coupons while her husband hid millions, the woman who raised a daughter who could look her in the eye and tell her to find a place to die. That woman was gone. She had died in that filthy motel room, and I had no intention of bringing her back. The next morning I called Jessica. My hand was perfectly steady. I've made my decision, I said, my voice clear and calm. I agree to your terms. Have your lawyer meet us at Arthur's office at 3 p.m. to sign the agreement dropping the charges. I heard a sharp intake of breath, a suppressed sound of victory on the other end of the line. I knew you'd see reason, Mother, she said, her voice oozing false magnanimity. You've made the right choice for the family. I've made the right choice for me. I corrected her and hung up. At 3 o'clock, we were all gathered again in Arthur's conference room. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Jessica and Mark sat on one side of the long table, looking smug and triumphant. Their lawyer, a slick man with a shark smile, sat beside them. Arthur sat next to me, his face a grim mask of disapproval. The shark lawyer slid a document across the table. This is a standard withdrawal of complaint. Once you sign this, Mrs. Vance, all criminal proceedings against my clients will be terminated, and our file on your late husband will be permanently destroyed. Picked up the pen. The room was silent. I could feel Jessica's eyes burning into me, willing me to sign. I looked up, not at her but at Mark. Before I sign this, I said, my voice ringing with a clarity that surprised even me, I want you to tell me something, Mark. When did you find out about Richard's finances? Was it before or after you helped my daughter forge a will to steal my inheritance? Mark paled. The shark lawyer started to object, but I cut him off. It doesn't matter, I said, putting the pen down. Because you see, I realized something last night. You people only have power over me if I value Richard's reputation more than I value my own integrity. You made a bet that I was still the same sentimental fool who would sacrifice everything to protect a man's honor. But Richard was a liar. He lied to me for 15 years. Why should I continue lying for him now? I looked directly at Jessica. You were right about one thing, dear. I can't save myself and save your father's good name. So I made a choice. I reached into my handbag and pulled out a thick envelope. I slid it across the table, not to them but to Arthur. What's that? Jessica asked, her voice suddenly uncertain. That, I said, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face, is a copy of a whistleblower complaint I filed with the Internal Revenue Service this morning at 8 a.m. I gave them everything. Every hidden ledger, every offshore account number, every shell company. I told them the whole ugly truth. The color drained from their faces. The smug triumph evaporated, replaced by sheer, unadulterated panic. You what? Mark stammered. I decided to clean up my own family's mess, I said, standing up. I will pay the back taxes. I will pay the penalties. I will make right what my husband made wrong. I would rather have one clean dollar that is legally mine than 33 million dirty ones. And I would rather see you both in prison than allow you to use my husband's sins to cover up your own. Just then the conference room door swung open. It wasn't a police officer this time. It was two stern-faced agents in dark suits, their badges clipped to their belts. Mark Hayes? Jessica Hayes. One of them said, his voice devoid of emotion. We're from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. We have a few questions for you. And for you too, Mrs. Hayes, he said, turning his gaze to a shocked Elizabeth, who had just entered the room to witness her victory. It seems we have reason to believe you were all involved in a conspiracy to blackmail a federal witness. The world of the Hayes family imploded with the quiet, devastating force of a controlled demolition. It turned out that when I filed my whistleblower complaint with the IRS that morning, I hadn't just given them Richard's financial records. I had, at Arthur's insistence, included a sworn affidavit detailing Elizabeth Hayes's $5 million offer and subsequent threat. My conversation with Jessica, where she laid out the entire blackmail scheme, had been recorded. What they had intended as leverage against me became the very evidence that damned them all. They weren't just parties to Richard's old crimes. They had created new ones right here in the present. Conspiracy to commit extortion, witness tampering, obstruction of justice. The list of charges grew, each one more serious than the last. Their slick lawyer was suddenly out of his depth, stammering about misunderstandings as the federal agents calmly and efficiently took over. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The state charges of fraud and elder abuse against Jessica and Mark were practically a footnote compared to the federal case that was now building against them and Elizabeth. The Hayes family fortune, which they had wielded like a weapon, was frozen pending the investigation. Their perfect, manicured world, built on generations of arrogance and presumed impunity, crumbled to dust. My own path was more complicated, because I had come forward voluntarily, and because I was the one who had exposed not only their crimes but my own husband's. The IRS treated me with a surprising degree of leniency. There were, of course, consequences. The investigation into Richard's finances was extensive. They clawed back years of unpaid taxes, and the penalties were staggering. But in the end, after the government took its share, what remained was still a substantial sum. More money than I could ever have imagined. And more importantly, it was clean. It was legally and morally mine. I had faced the ugly truth of my husband's legacy and had chosen to cleanse it, not hide it. I had lost a significant portion of the inheritance, but I had gained something far more valuable, my self-respect. The trial was a quiet affair, a plea bargain to avoid a messy public spectacle. Jessica and Mark, faced with a mountain of evidence, pleaded guilty. Jessica received a sentence of 5 years in federal prison for fraud and conspiracy. Mark, due to his more active role in the financial machinations and his previous, undisclosed history of securities violations that came to light, received 7. Elizabeth Hayes, the matriarch, avoided prison due to her age and health, but she was sentenced to house arrest and paid a fine so enormous it effectively gutted the remainder of her family's wealth. I attended the sentencing. I sat in the back of the courtroom and watched as my daughter, my only child, was led away in handcuffs. She looked at me one last time, her face a mixture of hatred and disbelief. In her eyes, I was the villain. I was the one who had destroyed her life, who had refused to play by the rules of her corrupt game. She never understood, and perhaps never will, that she was the architect of her own destruction. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I just felt a profound, aching sadness for the daughter I had lost long before she was ever put in chains. I walked out of the courthouse into the bright sunlight alone. The legal battles were over. The fortune was secured. The criminals were punished. But the real work was just beginning. The work of rebuilding a life not from the ashes of Richard's legacy, but on a new foundation, one that was entirely my own. The question that lingered in the quiet of my big, empty house was no longer about money or revenge. It was simpler and infinitely more terrifying. Who was Eleanor Vance now that she was no longer just a wife or a mother? 6 months after the sentencing, if you were to walk into my house, you wouldn't recognize it. The heavy, dark furniture Richard loved is gone, replaced with light, comfortable pieces I chose myself. The silence is no longer heavy with grief, but filled with the music I love to listen to. Ella Fitzgerald and Frank Sinatra. And Richard's study, the room where I discovered his secrets and made the hardest decision of my life, has been transformed. It's now my art studio. The walls are painted a clean, bright white. A large easel stands in the center of the room, bathed in the morning light from the new windows I had installed. Canvases are stacked against the walls, and the air smells of turpentine and oil paints. I had forgotten how much I loved to paint. I had set it aside when I married Richard, believing, as so many women of my generation did, that my role was to support his dreams, not pursue my own. Now, at 67 years old, I was rediscovering the girl who had once dreamed of being an artist. And I found that she was still there, waiting patiently for me all along. I didn't let the money sit idle. After setting aside enough to live comfortably, I used the rest, over $15 million, to establish the Vance Foundation. It's a nonprofit organization with a very specific mission: to provide free legal services and emergency housing for seniors who are victims of financial abuse, especially at the hands of their own families. I hired Arthur Davies to sit on the board of directors. Our first client was a woman whose son had convinced her to sign over the deed to her house, and then promptly tried to evict her. We won her case. That victory felt better than inheriting $33 million. Jessica writes me letters from prison. Long, rambling letters filled with self-pity and blame, with the occasional half-hearted apology thrown in. I read the first one. I haven't opened the rest. Maybe one day I will find it in my heart to forgive her. But forgiveness is a journey, not a destination, and I'm not ready to take that first step. Some betrayals cut too deep. Some broken things can't be put back together again. I am no longer just a wife. I am no longer just a mother. I am Eleanor Vance, a survivor, a philanthropist, an artist, a woman who, when faced with the wreckage of her life, chose not to weep among the ruins, but to build something new and beautiful in its place. I wanted to share this story with you, not for sympathy, but as a warning and hopefully as an inspiration. The cruelest betrayals often come from those closest to us, masked as love and concern. It whispers to you that you're too old, too confused, too weak to manage on your own. Tells you that you're useless. Please, I beg you, do not listen to that voice. Your worth is not defined by your role in someone else's life. It is innate. It is yours and yours alone. Trust your instincts. Fight for your dignity. It is never ever too late to reclaim your life. Thank you for listening to my story. If you or anyone you know has ever felt invisible or been made to feel useless by the people who should have loved you most, please share your experience in the comments below. We are not alone, and our voices together are a powerful force. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories. Your strength matters.